one of the reasons why I was hired by Microsoft a year and a half ago, because I am a total learning nerd. And not just sort of. I'm actually really, really into it. And I'm also part of a very small data influence team that's actually working to improve Microsoft so that for the engineers especially, they can learn, develop, and grow in ways they haven't been able to do before. And we do this because in our team at Microsoft, we actually believe that it is the best place for engineers to have and build a life-changing career. And if we're not there yet, we want to get there. So we're working towards that. So today, I'm actually not going to be sharing much about what we think is hot for learning or how many people take our classes. I'm actually going to be sharing with you much more about our experimentation process for figuring out how do we tweak the inputs to what we think we know about learning, and what do we do with the outputs from that going forward. And we do this because, like you, and like I've heard many times here today, we have to figure out how to help our engineers make the most of their limited time for learning. And frankly, as a learning professional for many years, the old ways of doing it isn't necessarily working in the ways we'd like to see anymore, especially as we work at scale. So I'm assuming, based on what I've heard today, and I would say this is fairly true, you're here because you want to know how is Microsoft Learning solving learning at scale for the engineers. I don't have all the answers. In fact, I hear a lot of the same struggles that you have. And so part of that is why we're here today, to learn from you, to grow from what you've shared. But I can say something we know that you know as well, is that learning and development budgets, they shrink and grow all the time, right? I see a lot of nodding heads. We know this one. And I'll say right now at Microsoft, we actually have a really good mix of classic learning and systems. We've got in-person training, we've got online courses, lots of different places to go. But then in the engineering space, it's a little different, actually, because we've had everything in the lush days of a whole program in college built right into the engineering system, do nothing. And then we've had the rise of user-generated content just spring up almost instantly. And we have that in MS Stream, and we see it in YouTube, and we see it in Docs, and it's everywhere. So despite having both that formal and informal grassroots learning content, we're actually still trying to figure out what those solutions are to this age-old problem, because we're still trying to deliver quality learning content in a timely and relevant fashion. And it's difficult. And I feel that in some ways, as a learning professional myself, we've failed a little bit in this regard because we haven't entirely fixed this deeper problem. And I want to actually take a look at this problem, step back a little. I don't know how long you've all been working in this. I feel like I'm a little older. But even just 10 years ago, there was actually a dearth of information and knowledge available. And so the learning professionals at the time were all tasked with creating that content, making it available for others. And you know what? We were damn good at it. We got out there, we partnered with those subject matter experts, we followed that ADDIE process to a T. And honestly, we filled those learning management systems full of hours-long courses. And you know what? That's good. We met a need. And it was actually helping a lot of folks. And then at some point, it changed. It really did change. The pace of the industry changed. Tech industry especially changed that. And so we went from this dearth of information and knowledge to suddenly user-generated content flourishing and being made available everywhere all the time. Mobile devices are, something that we literally can't leave home without. We literally mentally think that we've lost a hand or an arm without it. So all this has actually shifted and changed for us and became so much easier to do and use. So practically overnight, we went from having not enough information to way too much information and content. Even Microsoft, we provided so many different sites and ways to access and gain and see information. This is what you see up here, by the way. That it's just got to a point of like, where do you even start? Findability and discoverability, that was something that was brought up earlier. And if you look at this, one of the things we've actually been trying to do is rationalize how do we get this down to just one place, one-stop shop for everyone to go. Because honestly, learners don't care where it comes from. They just care that they can access it and get to it. Along that change and shift away from having to create and content, make it available, now to having so much, also changed the way we consume the content. One of the things that's happening now very much so is that we no longer have large blocks of time to get away to learn. Trying to get a week to go away to learn is like trying to pull, I don't know, someone come up with an example, but it's painful. It's very difficult. And so what we're finding is that spaces to learn is now happening in between the daily tasks. It's happening in between the sprint cycles. It's happening in the flow of work. You can no longer really strip it out as something that's separate. It's in the side. You're no longer going to training. You have to learn on the job in the moment as you go when you need it to accomplish what it is that you are trying to get done. So in doing that, I would like to stop and kind of think, are we adding to the problem? Are we helping the problem? Do we really know what the problem is? Because if there's too much content and not enough time to seek and consume that learning, what are we actually doing to change that? Before I get too much into solving that problem with you or what we think might be one possible solution, so I'm not going to say we have got the answer, I would like to define a few key terms with you. I'd like to be clear about how we think about learning, how we think about subject matter experts, communities of practice, what counts as collections and curation. So let's talk a little bit about learning. It's a lot more holistic than most people think. Most folks, when we talk to our employees, they're thinking learning is training. And managers think very much the same way. We think about it a little different. It's not just about being online or being in person. It's much more about that ability to acquire that information, to gain the understanding and build the skills through maybe formal courses of study, like a degree programs, nano degrees, micro degrees, certifications, badging, etc. It could also be through instruction, which actually could be online or in person, doesn't really matter. But it's someone who knows a little more than you, or maybe a lot more than you, working with you to get you up to that next level. It could be social interactions, what we would see as communities of practice in a formal structure, or it could be informally at the water coolers. It could even be in meetings when someone goes, I'm sorry, I don't understand. Could you explain it to me like I'm 5? Or through experience. We like this one because experience is actually nothing sinks harder in your brain than when you fail at something. And that's actually neuroscience. When you fail, you've got an emotional response to that, and that solidifies so firmly in your core. You will never forget it again. But you can't learn from it until you actually share it with someone, or you write it down, or something like that. Only once you get it out of your head do you actually truly learn from it. And your best bang for your buck is sharing it with someone else, so that they too can possibly learn from you. That's actually really hard to do. Also, collections and curation. Those are actually very different. More isn't better. Better is better, especially at scale. And so we think about this is the fact that it's a difference in presentation. Museums, for example, have entire collections in the basements of their buildings. And in those, somebody has to go in and curate that. So they go in by taking out those selected pieces and essentially giving each of those a description and then weaving them together to tell a story. And in telling that story, that comes from their knowledge and expertise, something that we trust. Because of their trust, they can be curators. And so that applies too here in learning content. Subject matter experts, I think we all know this, but it's just essentially a person who happens to be an authority in a particular domain, area, or topic. In the communities of practice, it's important on this one, is that they are groups of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do. And they learn how to do it better as they interact regularly with each other or with the content itself. And not everything that is a community can automatically be assumed a community of practice. They actually have to share a domain of interest, build relationships, and act as practitioners engaging in information sharing. And one last thing I'd like to clarify on too. Since we work with and support engineers, I want to define who we think of as engineers at Microsoft. Engineers at Microsoft, most folks assume that means software engineers, software developers, and certainly they are the largest disciplines by far. However, we also include the people that are program managers, that are service engineers, data and applied scientists, designers, content publishers, hardware manufacturing and research, all those together. They are all engineers at our company. We have a wide variety of needs. And there's 56,000 of them worldwide. More than that, actually. Continues to grow. So in doing this, we kind of had to figure out where to start. And so in Satya's book, Hit Refresh, which if you haven't read it, you probably should. It's actually a good book. He actually wrote, despite all this rapid change in the computing industry, we are still at the beginning of the digital revolution. And granted, he may have been talking about quantum computing or AI or something along those lines, but very much applies to us in our learning profession field. And mainly because what affects our audience affects us. And if we aren't changing to keep up with them, they can't keep up at all. So just as when our team formed, we actually stopped, we took time and chartered out our vision, our mission, our purpose to understand what were those opportunities ahead for us to help figure out how to make this happen. And we are a really small team, much like a lot of you. I recognize that I'm at Microsoft. We have large supporting systems and groups, but our team ourselves for 56,000 engineers is only 4 people. And we knew, even now, that we're always going to be a small team. And we have been very specifically picked for the knowledge, skills, abilities, experiences, and the unique point of views that each of us bring. And this is everyone here. We've got people in learning and development and culture change, that's me. We got Kimberly, who's responsible for the communities of practice, and content curation, which I'll actually show you a little here later. We got Bobby Conti, who actually have a data scientist on our team, a dedicated one to help us work with and essentially bridge with other data groups, and also works on the N1 engineering system at our company. And then Chris Schaefer, that's my manager, my boss. He's our chief connector. And it's important that we call him chief connector because we're a small team. We're extremely reliant on our partnership. Knowing that we weren't going to be expanding or ever getting bigger, we've actually had to reconsider our partnerships with everyone we work with. And in fact, one of the things that we really did was actually act in ways that enabled us to, well, actually enable, accelerate, and influence those around us, especially towards working together more collaboratively, sharing more information, being more transparent, yet still allowing for autonomy within the group. And we've actually internally collaborated with engineering leaders, HR, talent management, and the learning management system folks directly. There's no one that we don't try to go out and meet with. We also actually externally work with a lot of partners like Pluralsight and edX, for example. And those are just a few. We also recognize that what worked before won't necessarily work today. While the traditional L&D approaches, which I've always been a fan of, those have worked really well in the past, and they continue to fill the gaps today for a lot of our needs. We also still needed a different data-influenced, experiential, and iterative approach. Mainly the reason for that is because we really, again, want to focus on making information consumable and accessible to our engineers. And so literally every week, this is part of our learning at scale discussion. Every week we bring this up. Every week we ask, are what we're doing, does it work? Is what we're doing, could be done better? Is what we're doing, because honestly, if it doesn't work, we ditch it. Usually we have a few more other words in there referring to it, but if it doesn't work, it goes out. We also need to better understand what's getting in the way of learning. So we saw this as a huge opportunity as a new team to really come together and practice customer obsession. And so that's actually one of our cultural values at Microsoft. So we figured, what the heck, let's try to drink the Kool-Aid and see what happens. So when we put the learning engineer, who is our customer and our client, right in the middle and the center of our design, we actually much better understand their frustrations, especially while they're trying to get their job done. So we actually went out and we conducted focus groups. We participated in a 3-month interview process with engineering managers. And these managers are the ones that are responsible for fostering the development of their people. We also look at annual, monthly, and daily survey data, our pulse information. And from all that, what we've actually learned are 3 known barriers that exist for our engineers who are trying to learn. 1, I don't have the learning and development resources needed to do my job. 2, I don't have enough time for learning. And my favorite, 3, my manager is both supportive of and a barrier to my learning. And in those truths, we also have to think about the environment in which this is all happening. Again, the pace of the tech industry will not slow down. Engineers will increasingly have less and less time to seek and consume their learning. Every minute they're seeking for something, they're not learning. These are direct trade-offs. So conceptually imagine, just for a minute, that if an engineer has, like, say, 10 minutes, right, to go out and find and learn whatever it is she needs to do to fix her code, okay? So she goes out there, it takes her 9 minutes to search, okay? And then she's got 1 minute left to actually learn it. Is she gonna learn anything in that 1 minute? Show of hands, yes. Okay, she might be brilliant. She may have found exactly what she needed. But likely, show of hands, you think maybe no? She's gonna learn everything she needs in 1 minute? Yeah, it depends. But with that truth, we've actually recognized that we really need to be curating content instead of adding more content to our system and program. Our folks are in more need of gaining the access to it. So we want to flip that around. How do we do this? How do we make it so that we can get them to the content faster and quicker so that they spend 1 minute searching for it and 9 learning it? Because frankly, they're probably going to get interrupted at 6 minutes in anyway. So let me talk to you a little bit about how we actually move to a more meaningful presentation of our content and getting that in front of our engineer. I want to talk to you about how we became more curators and far less about being a creator or a collector. And we actually started with the question, what if the best content is already out there? What if we couldn't do it better? And from that, we actually started our focus on curating the meaningful and trustworthy content right off the bat. We were actually able to go out and review legacy programs and platforms. What already exists? What's internal to us? Remember that slide earlier with the Venn diagram? Lots of choices there. Lots of choices. Plenty to pick from. We also looked at internal search data. What are people searching for? Where are they searching for it? We had a lot of opportunities there. We have Bing. We have SharePoint. Lots of different places. We have our internal intranet. Lots of different places to look. We tried to find all of them and work with all the folks on the data side to figure out, okay, we did sentiment analysis, all that sort of thing. Existing engineering learning content too. We went out and said, okay, what's out there? Who's publishing their own stuff? We looked at videos, white papers. We looked up conference topics and materials, anything that was going on in the area, and documentation especially. And what we did is we went and found those authors or the event people that are putting on these shows, and we said, are you the expert? Are you the expert? Are you the expert? Who's the expert? Whom else should we be inviting to this conversation? Turns out that was a really fast way to get really good referrals. And in doing that, working and inviting those subject matter experts, inviting those communities of practice, and actually in some cases helping to form councils. We've had a hand in that. And we've asked them to create content, to curate the content. And we also are open to getting audience suggestions. We've got plenty of places where people can send us email. They can reply to the announcements and emails and distributed lists that we send out. The actual site where they go to get their learning information. There's a can't find what you're looking for card. They can click on that and submit. They can also suggest things. Hey, I found this really great code review video. This should go somewhere on your page. We run it through our SMEs and through our councils and everything. See if it makes the cut. If it does, in it goes. And so this is how we actually use curation to maximize the value of the tiny little resources we do have. Because we're a tiny team. Because engineers don't have a lot of time to seek and consume learning. Because remember, for every minute they are spending out there seeking, they're not learning. That's a problem we're trying to solve. This is actually one of our pages, is our Engineering Academy. This is our coding page. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Ultimately, too, because half of our team is learning professionals, so there's 2 of us. Ultimately, as learning professionals, it was our responsibility to realize that we had to evolve. And so we actually had to step away, just full on step away and say, you know what? We don't get to be owners and creators of content. We don't even get to be collectors anymore. We no longer get to put the smorgasbord out and make it available for everyone. Our job now is to be much more specific. Instead of serving to the masses, instead we want to carefully work with our data, work with our experts, and our partners and curate that perfect plate of information that is relevant and timely and addresses their needs. And that actually appears to be working really well right now for us. But I said right now, that might not always be the case. And so I would love to hear from you what you think might be missing. I'd love to hear from you what you think we might be able to do to further improve this. I really would. Before I do that, I will tell you where we're going next. So on the horizon for us, we are actually looking into learning paths. That's where we're going to be taking that curated content and actually trying to organize it in a way that would let folks essentially do like the micro degrees or a path that gets you from where you are today to more advanced in your knowledge later. And I don't think that that's rocket science. It's actually pretty straightforward, but it's difficult to do with curated content because you're not controlling the quality or the length and stuff. So you start to think about those things as more of assets and figuring out how to put them together in a way and what's your leveling criteria for figuring out what goes at what stage and what's appropriate. So we're not there yet, but we're working towards that. And also, because I am a big learning nerd, and I think this is about to get really meta, we are using artificial intelligence to actually help develop real intelligence. And so we're looking at things at like the artificial intelligence bots and figuring out how can we use those and leverage those in the learning space. And another thing is too, is we're looking to figure out how can we automate much of this work. So because much of the curation work I just showed you today, which is awesome, is incredibly manual. It's all done by people. And that means a lot of time and energy. And so if we can get ourselves out of that role quickly, that means that we're freed up to do some better stuff, some more creative things, some even more innovative stuff for our own engineers. And that's actually one of our goals, because we really do want them to have life-changing careers at Microsoft. And I will happily take questions or any suggestions, what you think we should be considering. Oh, hands.
Hi, I'm curious about your process for gathering the requirements for the stories that you wanted to tell with the curated content. Like, who are you approaching? What are you considering? How are you gathering those requirements?
So, like I said, going back to that other slide, this one here for the curated content. So mostly, like I said, for the stories, we actually leave that up to subject matter experts and the communities of practice to kind of define. But I'll be honest, we don't actually have cohesive stories for a lot of it. In fact, I'll show you a slide here. So this one's a good example. This one actually does tell a bit of a story in the sense that I want to build a website. And the story is really that whole thing of like, I want to build a website as a starting point for a topic. And any of these things will get you there to at least start it. And those go to other pages that kind of get more into it. But let me take you actually to here. This is actually our engineering academy. So the page is actually front page for our engineers. There's actually more content, but due to legal things, they can't be up there. So these are the ones that are. So the story that you see here isn't so much a story right now, except for a few of them. I do believe actually the AI, we have a little more stories about, oh, well, for code we do, but the AI, we have a little better framework around some of that, and machine learning is actually a little better. And so we've actually worked to organize some of this in a certain order that would make sense, working with maybe a partnership, being part of a community, distribution list, things like that. We have active groups, so usually when you get involved in one, we also make the suggestions of, hey, you should also be part of this community, and that'll help you kind of fill out the rest of your story. But we don't have a, here's where to start in your story, and here's where it ends. In fact, I'm not sure where it ends. Nobody does. Great question. Yes.
So if I put my engineering hat on, and when I'm trying to learn something, I already have the best curator out there, right? I go to my favorite search engine, and it has AI that'll help me find the result that I'm looking for, and I can find it, and I can quickly see it, and then I can come back to my work. So how do you compete with that?
We're not competing. We want this to go away, to be honest. Ideally, I'd love to see exactly what you said work 100% every single time. We're not going to try to hang on to this. We're just going to try to keep leveraging that kind of stuff. So the way that we're looking at it is like, if we get to that point, then that's great. What's next for us? Where can we take that into the flow of work? Like as you're working, you're like, darn it, I don't know how to do this. Maybe it should highlight and pop up. And it's like, oh, I'll click on that, instant search, boom, here's what you take. That would be fantastic. There you go. I want to be put out of a job in a way. I want to be put out of today's job. Does that make sense? I'm dead serious, actually. Yeah, no, I'm dead serious. And when you think about the engineering hat, our own profession, we shouldn't be doing the same thing we're doing today in 2 years from now, or in 5 years, or 10, because we're not evolving if we're not. And so that's a great question.
Well, and so to jump on that question, or piggyback on that question, there's also internal things that are important, that like your favorite search engine is not going to pick up because it's not going to hit your whatever internal systems you have. And so that's where, like, so at Shopify, we've been looking at learning experience platforms and bringing something in, and like that just resonates with a lot of the things that you're talking about. So have you been looking at learning experience platforms, or do you see that as part of guiding what the next thing is for Microsoft?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So the answer is yes, we are looking at that. We also have our spaghetti of things inside to work with. We have our factions, our Venn diagrams, all those different sites. So, I mean, I'll be quite frank, some of it's political. Some of it's also figuring out what is it that we're trying to solve and what is it that we really need to, like, because what we're doing today won't get us there tomorrow. So we do need to change. That said, we are looking at that kind of stuff. We are definitely taking much more of a focus of user research, so or customer journey mapping, or borrow any of those terms, but essentially, again, putting that learner in the middle of the design, learner centered, and just kind of being like, what's that journey look like from start to finish? Even if you don't know what the end line looks like, what does it look like on the way to there? So yeah, I mean, I'd love to see, my ideal world would be this kind of this geolocation thing, your cell phone, you know, like whatever you're working on, Amazon recommendations, except for learning, you know, but even that too shall pass in time. So, I mean, it'll be great for 5, 10 years, if that, but it too shall pass. But I'm okay with that. That's just, get used to it. The one constant is change. So yeah.
So what prevents people at Microsoft, say thought leaders in the space of AI, for example, creating pages like this all across the organization and publishing super high quality content? How would somebody that wants to learn about AI at Microsoft, pick which one of those 1, 2, 10, or 12, very, very high quality sources?
Really good question. So that, again, that's where those communities of practice or the councils really come into play, because there is a lot of variety and standard in terms of quality of what's out there. And I think we heard earlier today too, somebody actually went out and was like, you know what, we're gonna execute on poor training, a bad experience, a bad learning experience, just to make the case that we need to do this right. So I think that's kind of what you're driving to. We, on our site here, we don't just put anything up here. We do collect everything, but then we run it through, like I said, either the subject matter expert, if there's only 1 or 2, or we run it through the community of practice. We actually have a machine learning and data science really active group at Microsoft. So they actually care a lot about this content. And so while some of them are actually producers or creators of the content themselves, a lot of them are actually more than happy to actually give feedback or constructive criticism to actually improve existing content. And because we have not say monthly, but I think twice a year, we actually have an internal data science seminar, or I guess a conference, that people get together. This stuff is updated fairly regularly. So we can actually pull that content up into our internal site and make it available. Now, we don't have our rating systems yet, though, which is something that I am asking for. Because it's one thing to have experts review it, but their covert knowledge, they start way up here, and a foundational level is like, I don't even understand the words coming out of these people's mouths. I mean, I'm one of those. I mean, I feel like sometimes I'm like, I have a bare sense of machine learning and data science, and I'm like, dude, I have a PhD. Why can't I understand this? So that's a failure in communicating to the audience. So I would love to see a rating system get in here to be like, yeah, great content if I could even understand it. And I think that would be true for a lot of the work. We are working, though, to try to close those gaps. We have actually gotten some of that feedback, and we've gone back to the community and said, do you have anything that's, like machine learning or data science for dummies? And they're like, well, I actually think there's a book for that. I'm like, great. So we'll link the book in here because we have access to Safari and to a lot of other library subscriptions. So that's not excluded. And then we usually try to find a community we can partner them with, or a mentor, or a coach, or whatever it is that makes sense in that case. But most of the time, I think it's like, we do a lot of reverse peer mentoring kind of opportunities there. So senior and we're trying for that. Yeah, that's a great point. Single source of truth. Yeah. I don't want to run over, but okay.
So how do you motivate 56,000 people to update the stuff that they create now, or the stuff that you curate?
Well, I don't think we actually have 56,000 contributors. That's a good thing. If we do, we don't know about all of it. So that's the other factor. What we do know is what is essentially sourced here from the groups we're working with, or people have volunteered themselves. And so again, we have an intake process, and that's actually something someone had asked me about earlier at one of the breaks, is how do you manage this? We actually now have we hired a consultant to come in and help us figure out what does the process look like. And now we're on a cadence schedule of 6 to 8 weeks. We run updates, which is kind of long. It's a little slow, but it's the best we can do because it's manually curated at this point. But that does go through a process where we take in all the new stuff. We figure out which groups can assess it or vet it. We have them review, get back to us, and then we update. And that's pretty much routine now. Couldn't do it otherwise. You'll drown in it. So, yeah. All right, great. Any other questions? Or I guess we're at time.
Thank you so much.